Joseph Stalin. You know, the name itself just brings up these images of absolute power and, well, unimaginable terror. This was the man who took frankly, a backward agrarian empire and forged it into a nuclear-armed superpower, a nation that would go toe-to-toe with the United States for control of the globe. But, and it's a huge but, he did it through a reign of brutality that cost millions and millions of lives. So let's try to unpack this central paradox. Was he a brilliant state builder, a mass murderer, or somehow terrifyingly both?
And this quote right here, this really gets to the core of his entire worldview. It tells you everything you need to know. This single sentence reveals that brutal, almost desperate urgency that drove every single decision he made. For Stalin, the survival of the Soviet state justified literally any method and any human cost. It was a race against time, and he was willing to sacrifice millions of his own people to win it.
But you know, to really understand the dictator, we have to first understand the man. And that story, it doesn't begin in the Kremlin. It starts in a small, poor town in Gori, Georgia, with a young boy named Yoseb Juhashvili. Now, what's so fascinating about this timeline is the complete transformation it shows. I mean, born into poverty, dealing with a violent father, young Yoseb was actually a brilliant student. He was on track to become a priest. But inside the Tiflis Theological Seminary, which was surprisingly a hotbed of radical thought, he got his hands on the forbidden writings of Karl Marx. And that was it. By 1899, he's expelled, choosing the life of a professional revolutionary over the church. From that point on, his path was totally set. You see, while other revolutionaries, guys like Trotsky were in European cafes debating high-minded theory, Stalin was on the ground, back in the Russian Empire, getting his hands dirty. He became the Bolshevik Party's main fundraiser through what they politely called expropriations, which really means bank robberies, kidnappings, the whole shebang. This cemented his reputation not as some great thinker, but as a man of action, a loyal, ruthless organizer who just got things done.
And that reputation as a man who gets things done is absolutely key to understanding what happens next, because Stalin's climb to absolute power wasn't about fiery speeches or being a hero on the battlefield. No, it was a slow, methodical, and totally lethal takeover of the party machine itself.
So how did he actually pull it off? Well, first, he took what everyone thought was a super boring job, general secretary. His rivals kind of laughed at him, thinking it was just paperwork. But Stalin saw its true power. It gave him control over something called the nomenklatura, basically the list of all key party appointments. So he patiently starts filling the entire Soviet bureaucracy with people who owed their careers directly to him. After that, he makes these temporary alliances to isolate his rivals one by one, playing them off each other until there was absolutely no one left standing in his way.
And right here, you can see the chilling finality of that strategy. Just look at the outcome for every single one of the old Bolsheviks, the original leaders of the revolution. They were all methodically outmaneuvered and then, one by one, just eliminated. Trotsky, his biggest rival, was exiled and later assassinated. The others, Zinoviev, Kamenev, Bukharin, they all faced show trials and execution. By the late 1930s, Stalin's power wasn't just secure, it was absolute. So now, with total control in his hands, Stalin launches what's called the Great Turn. This was his radical, completely ruthless plan to drag the Soviet Union from the age of the wooden plow, kicking and screaming, into the industrial age. And he was dead set on doing it in just one decade.
And if you just look at the numbers, the results were incredible. The 5-year plans were all about heavy industry. Check out this chart. Coal production more than tripled, steel production more than quadrupled, all in just 10 years. He was, by pure force, creating an industrial giant, a nation that could pump out tanks, planes, and weapons on a scale nobody thought was possible. But how did he pay for all this? Well, to get the money for the factories, Stalin basically declared war on his own people, on the peasantry, through forced collectivization. The state seized millions of private farms, creating these massive, state-run collectives. They took the grain to feed the cities and sell overseas. And anyone who resisted, the so-called kulaks, or wealthy peasants, they were targeted for liquidation. This total disruption of agriculture, combined with the state's brutal grain seizures, led to a completely catastrophic famine. And this number, 4 million, that's the estimated number of people who died from starvation in Ukraine alone during the Holodomor of 1932-33. It was a famine that many historians now argue was deliberately engineered to crush Ukrainian nationalism.
And at the exact same time, Stalin launched a wave of political terror to wipe out any and all threats to his power, whether they were real or just something he imagined. This period became known as the Great Purge.
Just let that number sink in for a second. 1,500. That was the average number of executions carried out every single day at the peak of the Great Terror in 1937 and 1938. This wave of terror swept through every single level of society, from the top party elite all the way down to ordinary citizens.
And alongside the firing squads, there was the massive expansion of the Gulag system. This was a whole network of brutal forced labor camps that stretched across the entire country, usually in the absolute harshest places, like Siberia. The scale of it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. An estimated 18 million people passed through the gates of these camps, and millions more were just exiled to the middle of nowhere. At its peak, 2.5 million people were in the camps at once, and of all those who went in, at least 1.5 million never came out. The Gulag was a tool of political repression, for sure, but it was also a key part of the Soviet economy, using slave labor to build canals, mines, and factories.
So, in his final chapter, Stalin would face his biggest test yet. He would lead the Soviet Union through the absolute inferno of the Second World War, and, in doing so, cement its place as a global superpower.
You know, after being totally paralyzed by the shock of the Nazi invasion in 1941, Stalin rallied. He really evolved from a meddling commander into a seriously effective warlord, learning to delegate to brilliant generals like Zhukov. But his victory wasn't just on the battlefield. When he sat down at the negotiating table at Yalta and Potsdam, he proved to be a master diplomat, completely outmaneuvering Roosevelt and Churchill to secure Soviet domination over all of Eastern Europe. He basically set the stage for the entire Cold War. So how do historians even make sense of all this? Well, the debate pretty much falls into two camps. You've got the totalitarian school, which sees Stalin as a master puppeteer, a paranoid tyrant with absolute control, and that all the terror flowed directly from his personal wishes. Then you have the revisionist school, which argues the whole system was a lot more chaotic. They suggest that Stalin would set these broad, vague directives, and that overzealous or just plain terrified local officials were responsible for a lot of the worst excess. And this isn't just some academic argument. It's really a debate about the nature of power itself. Is history shaped by these all-powerful individuals or by the chaotic systems they live in? Which brings us right back to that ultimate question we started with. Stalin's legacy is just this profound, horrifying paradox. He built a superpower that defeated Nazism and put the first man in space, but he did it through a system of terror and slavery that killed millions upon millions of his own people. So what's the final verdict? Architect or monster? You know, perhaps the most disturbing answer of all is that he was both.